So I want to hear your thoughts. I don't know if I've ever asked you about sort of that geopolitical side, BRICS forming, Russia wanting to evade sanctions, and countries essentially creating these parallel systems because they're saying, why would we even keep U.S. treasuries in reserves? You guys just keep printing away the value.
If you read Putin's speeches to his parliament, which it doesn't get a lot of airtime in the United States, he says exactly that.
Meanwhile, your president says the budget can balance itself.
Let's not talk. Let's talk about a president with a brain. Putin, you can like him or not, he actually has a brain, versus Trudeau, who doesn't have a brain. So let's not talk about someone without a brain.
So how do you think this is going to play out? Do you think that the Western nations will get their act together and strategically acquire Bitcoin? Do you think maybe a country in Asia will acquire Bitcoin?
Yeah.
How do you see this?
Well, it's game theory. So, I mean, we're already seeing it happen in El Salvador. Now, the population of El Salvador is 6 million, and the GDP of El Salvador, if I remember correctly, is like 29 billion. I need you to understand that is 1/1000th of the size of the U.S. GDP. So, like, El Salvador and what they're doing is amazing, but probably the greater Miami area has a larger GDP than the entire country of El Salvador. But that doesn't mean that a larger country in South America can't follow El Salvador's lead. It also doesn't mean that a G7 country can't follow El Salvador's lead, but I don't know which one it'll be. But if I had to bet, and I said G7, but Russia's not in there, but let's say we call it a G8 or G9 grouping, which is China, Russia, and the rest of the G7, it will most likely be Russia, in my opinion, because Putin has got up and he has basically said, the U.S. froze my reserve asset, which is U.S. treasuries, and I don't like selling my valuable natural resource energy for a U.S. dollar that can be printed and frozen. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to price my valuable natural resource energy in something better. And he's floated the idea of gold. He's floated the idea of the yuan. That being said, he'll figure out that Bitcoin is actually the perfect. Because digital energy, as Saylor says, for natural resource energy, as an engineer, makes eminent sense as far as I'm concerned.
Speaking of energy, I know that you are doing a lot of work recently with Bitcoin mining and the different companies within the space. Do you want to share anything about that? Because I know that just in the last year, some have, we've seen some face major liquidity and solvency issues. There's always that FUD out there that, it uses too much energy. We should move to proof of stake. But Bitcoin mining, I think, could actually potentially be such an advantage in terms of economics here.
Well, it's not just an advantage in economics. It's actually an advantage in what's called load balancing for the grid. We have a situation in Canada where we have a nuclear reactor that at some times of the day, it has an excess. You don't change the base capacity of a nuclear reactor. That generator cannot power up and power down without causing a core meltdown. So it's producing the same amount of gigawatts at all times of day. But if there's no one taking those gigawatts, that power, it's like a shorting out of your fuse. So we have to find, and we don't have the transmission to transmit that power all over Canada.
So that's stranded energy.
It is, and in fact, we have to pay Americans, not sell the power cheaply. We pay Americans to take that power.
Wow.
Don't you think? And the member of parliament in that region is a pretty close friend of mine, as far as a Bitcoiner goes, and he gets it. Like, why shouldn't that nuclear power plant or facility be mining Bitcoin in the to balance their load? Now, that's just one small part of it. The Bitcoin mining. This is a great conference we're at. And yes, I'm talking with a lot of people. We own some power assets in Canada. But here's my prediction. The Bitcoin miners of the future are going to be the current energy companies of today. They're going to be the utilities, the Duke Energies, the TEPCOs in Japan.
Shell is sponsoring the Bitcoin conference.
I didn't know that. So there you go. So those companies at the current Bitcoin mining is a very difficult business because they don't control their input costs, which is energy, and they don't control their output revenues, which is set by the market or the price of Bitcoin. So you have this business that, quite honestly, is a pretty difficult business. The future will be when you have a slice of the vertical. You, own the energy, whether it comes from natural gas, the molecule in the ground that goes to the power plant that generates electricity. mines Bitcoin, and then distributes it to the ecosystem. That is a friggin' good business.
Yeah.
That is the future.